Here's something I notice with A2 learners all the time. They can tell you what they're doing, no problem. But when you ask them, warum, why, then they kind of freeze up. And not just, I guess, because most people don't really have any idea at all why they do what they do. No, being able to give reasons, explain intentions, and name up results or consequences is another one of those important distinctions between A2 and B1. So today we're looking at the words and structures that B1 speakers use to connect ideas. And once you've got these, your German is going to sound way more natural and way more fluent. Grüß Gott, hallo, ich bin Billy Badger und das ist jetzt zweifelsohne Bausteine 3. Herzlich willkommen. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, what's he on about? It's really easy to express reasons. We just use the conjunction weil. Well, true, that works, but there's a bit more to it than that. And here's what I mean. Have you ever really thought about the distinction between these three things? Reasons or explanations, purposes or intentions, and consequences or results. And then to make things even more confusing, there's not only the usual intended consequences, things that we expect to happen as a result, but also those unintentional ones. See what I mean? We're B1 level now, so there's quite a bit more nuance for us to be thinking about. So we better get started. Los geht's. First up are those reasons. What we're trying to do here is to explain why, aren't we? Give explanations for certain states or actions. You know this already. This is when we're using weil or denn. Let's get some examples anyway. Sie kommt morgen vorbei, weil ich Hilfe brauche. She's calling by tomorrow because I need help. We're presenting a reason, an explanation, aren't we? I need help, so this is why she's coming past. Of course, you could also use denn, which is perhaps easier to use, but it's actually not used as often when we're speaking and is maybe a little bit more formal or literary in nature. Sie kommt morgen vorbei, denn sie ist ein sehr fürsorglicher Mensch. Here we've got two main clauses, and actually this form is a little bit less flexible than weil because you are very unlikely to start your sentence with denn, but you could start your sentence, especially when speaking, with weil. Weil ich kein Auto habe, holt sie mich morgen ab. I'm starting with the explanation, and we could do the same thing with the slightly more formal word, especially if we're writing da. This might be a good equivalent of since in English, and it's also subordinating. Da sie viel Sport treibt, ist sie sehr fit. Again, we're framing this as a reason or an explanation of why she's fit. She's very fit because or since she does a lot of sport. And if you're thinking to yourself, look, I know all this distinction will become important later on. So yes, let's move on. We've thought about explanations. Let's think now about our intentions. And to do this, we're going to go back to the sentence that we had earlier. Sie kommt morgen vorbei, weil ich Hilfe brauche. What's the intention here? You might say to me, well, to help me. True, but no, this is a connection that we are making in our own heads. Man weiß ja nicht unbedingt, dass sie vorhat, mir zu helfen. This is your own conclusion. So to express intentions, we use another structure. Sie kommt morgen vorbei, mir zu helfen. Now we're making a direct connection between what she's doing and what she's intending. What about that other sentence? Da sie viel Sport treibt, ist sie sehr fit. This kind of sounds a little bit like an intention, doesn't it? Her purpose for doing lots of sport is to stay fit. Das stimmt, aber in diesem Satz wird diese Absicht nicht betont. Wenn wir sie betonen möchten, dann kann man die Idee so formulieren. Sie macht viel Sport, fit zu sein oder fit zu bleiben. There's a different emphasis here, isn't there? And it's this kind of thing that makes the distinction between A2 and B1. Another quick example, because we've got something important coming up. Sie holt mich ab, mich mit aufs Konzert zu bringen. She's picking me up to take me to the concert. Now, I don't know whether you've noticed, but in both of these clauses, she, whoever she might be, is the subject. And that's no accident. So what if the sentence was a bit different? Like, for example, she's going to pick me up, but let's make the second clause so that I don't have to catch the bus. Two clauses, two different subjects. Can we use zu to describe this intention, the purpose? Of course, the answer is no. Here's what we do. Sie holt mich ab, damit ich nicht mit dem Bus fahren muss. Two clauses, two different subjects, one intention. Or, sie hilft mir, damit ich nicht selber kochen muss. The intention of this help is clear, and we're using damit to introduce it because we've got two different subjects in both of those clauses. A couple more examples before we move on. Ich spreche langsam, damit du mich verstehst. Ich mache das Video, damit ihr gut auf das B1-Niveau kommt. So we've talked about how to give reasons, explaining why something happens. Sie kommt morgen vorbei, weil ich Hilfe brauche. We've talked about how to describe intentions, what you're trying to achieve. If you like, it's our purpose. This might be with the same subject. Sie kommt morgen vorbei, mir zu helfen. Or with different subjects. Sie kommt morgen vorbei, damit ich nicht selber kochen muss. There's intention here, or there's, if you like, an intended result. But sometimes there are results with no explicit intention. Es hat sehr stark geregnet. How do we continue from here? What might the result be? Naja, es hat sehr stark geregnet, deshalb bin ich jetzt patschnass. Now we're expressing the result or the consequence of it raining. Or wir haben laute Musik gehört, deshalb haben sich die Nachbarn aufgeregt. That was the result, but there's no information here to tell us whether it was intended or not. If I'd said, wir haben absichtlich laute Musik gehört, damit sich die Nachbarn ärgern, then there is an intended result. Or we could use deswegen. Ich bin nicht sehr fit, deswegen gehe ich ins Fitnessstudio. Or remember this sentence, sie holt mich ab, weil ich kein Auto habe. Let's express this in a more results-focused way. Ich habe kein Auto, deshalb holt sie mich ab. Or du willst auf das B1-Niveau kommen, deswegen mache ich das Video. Okay, let's turn things around now, because sometimes we do things and they have rather unexpected results or consequences. Can we use one of the structures that we've already introduced, or do we need a new one? Let's take this example. Sie ist vorbeigekommen, damit ich nicht kochen musste. That was her purpose. But maybe we just want to express the idea of consequences or unintended results of actions. But what if I wanted to cook and she's come around and taken over and I didn't get a chance to cook what I wanted to? Well, that is a different matter. Sie ist vorbeigekommen, sodass ich nicht kochen konnte. Sie hat mich abgeholt, sodass ich nicht selber fahren konnte. She's picked me up with the unintended consequence that I couldn't drive by myself. And it sounds like, in this example at least, that I wanted to. And now on to our bonus section. Let's imagine you're joining a gym and the trainer wants to know your motivation. How will you answer? Maybe it's, getting fit, losing weight, or even to work off all that stress. Well, we could use a few of our structures that we've already come across. What about weil? Well, this is possible. Ich will ins Gym, weil ich abnehmen möchte. I could use zu because it's the same subject. Ich will ins Gym, fit zu werden. I couldn't use damit because the subjects are the same. But if we're trying to answer quickly, a lot of these sentences I think are a bit long-winded. This is where we can simply say zum fit werden, zum abnehmen, zum Stress abbauen. What about the question, warum kommt Sabine vorbei? If it's a simple answer, we could say zum Lernen, zum Kochen, or nur zum Klönen. But if the reason is any more complicated, we need to go back to zu. Sie kommt, mit mir die Geburtstagsfeier zu diskutieren. Sie kommt, mir beim Kochen zu helfen. So, in short, pick the form that matches your message. Say why with weil, denn, da. Describe your purpose with zu, if you're using the same subject in both clauses, or damit, if you've got different subjects, and highlight any kind of results with deswegen or deshalb, or all those unintended consequences with so, das. And if you can flip the same idea through reason, intention, and consequence, like this over here, then you're thinking at B1 level and you'll sound like it. Das war's dann für heute und auch für dieses Video. Danke fürs Zuschauen und tschüss.
Sehr gut.